Listeners, what a great guest we had today. Her name is Dr. Lorie Hood. She's a neuropsychologist, traumatologist, certified master coach, and a TEDx speaker. She is a leading expert in trauma, PTSD, neuroscience, and human potential. She has focused her research and clinical work on first responders, victims of mass trauma, and high performers. And we took such a windy road and lost our train of thought. So we're going to have some of the outtakes of the show after the show. So I hope you enjoy the show. And then those outtakes are pretty good too, because we couldn't stop laughing. Thanks for joining us.
I wanna try and take in all the highs, embrace them for more than a moment's time. I want you, please don't move when I push you away. I know I contradict myself some days, but will you ride the lows with me?
Welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I am your host, Kristin and Dr. Our goal is to help discussions about mental health be a regular part of your daily life, no different than discussions about physical health. Mental illness can be a topic of discussion under the umbrella of mental health, along with so many other topics. This show is the original program on mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com. Our network of shows are played in over 180 countries and cover more topics under that umbrella than you can possibly imagine. We were talking about mental health long before it became cool and popular to talk about, and thank goodness it has become so popular. We have incredible guests, advocates, patients, experts, people. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy our intro music, a song named Lows, written by Aubrey Toon. You can find her music at www.aubreytoone.com.
That night when I started praying, I cried. Will you ride the lows with me? Will you ride the lows with me? When I'm down, my vision gets blurry.
Dr. Hood, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
I have to give a shout out to Christy Warren of the Firefighter Deconstructed for emailing me and saying, you have to have Dr. Lorie Hood on your show. I said, okay.
Well, I love Christy. She's awesome. She's just wonderful. And her podcast, The Firefighter Deconstructed, is just so beautifully done. Love her.
I know I talked her into doing it, and she was like, I don't know how to do that. I've said, trust me. I've helped an 84-year-old man who said, you will never help me get past the technology piece. And guess what? He does a show every week. So I told her, if I can help him, I can help you. So
Right. That's a great story though, too. Like, that's wonderful.
Now, I want to start with, we're going to get into trauma, obviously, and neuroscience and PTSD and all of those things. However, we were having a really interesting kind of a tidbit you were sharing with me that I was not aware of, and I really want my listeners to hear about it. And that is with the way women are announced that are doctors as opposed to how men are. So can you share a little, what we were talking about with my listeners?
Yeah, sure. So this was just something I kind of stumbled upon. I think being a researcher, I noticed patterns. And so I was noticing that a lot of people were referring to me as Dr. Lorie, which is fine. I liked it, actually. It seemed really friendly, and I was, it seemed approachable, and I felt like it fit me. But I started noticing a pattern in that women who had PhDs or MDs were being introduced as doctor and their first name, while men were being announced as, greeted by doctor and their last name. And kind of watched it for a while, and I think this is really a pattern. So one of my interns is a linguist, and I asked him, and he's like, oh, Lorie, he goes, this is a total thing. Like, it's a total thing. We had a whole class about it, a whole seminar about the way women are addressed and introduced differently than men in professional titles. So it's a thing. And I think it's really important to get it out there because, I was talking to a friend of mine and she was saying, it seems like a little thing. And I said, well, it is kind of a little thing. And she goes, it's not a little thing. And I think that stuff adds up. It goes along with implicit bias, right? Which goes along with a lot of trauma. So yeah, I think it is important.
I agree. I mean, other than Dr. Phil, but it's questionable whether or not he still has those credentials anymore.
Right.
You would tend to maybe think, well, maybe because it's women, it's more friendly, but then that has its own bias too, doesn't it?
Well, of course. Yeah. I mean, it's in some sense, and I can't really tell you what sense because I don't really have the research to sort of pinpoint it, but it feels intuitively to me that it's sort of minimizing. I mean, if a woman goes through medical school and a man goes through medical school, they both go through medical school, and why would you in some way kind of diminish her, accomplishment in that way?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you. I when you were saying that, I thought, oh, I want to bring that up because I always check ahead of time with a guest. You want me to call you doctor or by your first name or whatever is your comfort level. And everybody except a rare few will say, oh, say doctor, first name, last name in your intro, and then just call me by my first name throughout, which is great. I love that. It makes for a relaxed the style. That's my show. But a couple of times I've had somebody say, no, you absolutely have to call me Dr. So-and-so. And that's only been men.
Interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's really interesting. Yeah. I'm not sure what that's all about and, where it came from, but I do think words are very powerful. Well, I know they're very powerful.
Right.
And, even the intention behind them is powerful.
Absolutely.
And I feel like we should question and think critically about, why was that happening? And, there's a lot of things in our society that are just sort of passed on without anybody ever questioning them. And,
so many
I like that you're putting stuff out there to question and to hopefully get people to think. That's what I'm trying to do on my podcast, is to get people to think critically and not just sort of accept spoon feeding. Like I call it pre-thought thoughts. A lot of Americans just want to have thoughts sort of pre-thought for them and handed them or spoon fed to them. And I think we've become a pretty intellectually lazy society.
Absolutely. And what do you think in terms of so much is going on? I don't even need to state the obvious. So much is going on that even me, who this is what I do, I've been doing this forever. I've got, over 3,000 hours of recordings. Even someone who really does pay attention, obviously, and has to pay attention to those biases and so on. Even I get to a point where I'm like, I just can't, I can't really deal with anything right now. There's so much that I just can't. So how do you do that in terms of your work as a certified master coach and, the coaching that you do with others during this time in particular, when people that are so mentally healthy, let's say, in many, many ways, and very conscious and awake in their lives, and yet they are also, I just can't deal right now.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think that we won't know for a long time how this has really affected people, psychologically, emotionally. We're just gonna, because we don't know, right? We don't know what's going to be the next turn, or the next, crazy thing to happen. So I know I'm here to talk about trauma, but to answer your question, I developed a body of work called High Stakes Performance. More than a decade ago. I was working on it, even though I wasn't really aware that I was working on it probably for several decades, but it actually came from the trauma literature. And what happened was I was very familiar with neuroscience and the trauma literature, and the trauma literature uses something called the window of tolerance. So this is educational just in and of itself. It's well established in the research literature. And basically, there's sort of a window where it's the window of tolerance is where your brain is kind of working really well. And if you go above the window of tolerance, you're basically going into fight flight. So that's where, your heart beats really quickly and your breath becomes shallow and rapid and your eyes, your pupils dilate. All that happens automatically, right? And if you go below it, it's called under arousal. So above it is hyper or over arousal. Below the window of tolerance is hypo or under arousal. And some people actually collapse. Mm. And a lot of times people think it's blood sugar or it's, blood pressure, something else that's making them physically kind of crash. Or people will also feel really, really exhausted all of a sudden. And that can be a sign that your endocrine system is sort of working overboard and keeping you in this over arousal place. And eventually it just can't do it anymore. So I was already worried about Americans kind of being in I used to call it a modified fight flight state almost all the time, because we work 24 hours a day and we have all this stimuli coming toward us and there's no real balance, right? But now it's even more difficult because people are kept kind of inside, right?
Yep.
So one of the ways that our bodies are able to, and they're built to and wired to release or relieve themselves from fight flight is by moving. So let me just give you a little example. Long time ago, a cave bear comes out of the woods and a human being would immediately get a stress response in their brain and their body would react. People dilate again, rapid breath, all that stuff. And they would fight or flee, hence the term fight or flight, right? And in the fighting or fleeing, there's a bunch of stuff, physical activity that happens. And so a lot of those chemicals are sort of dissipated, right? And then another chemical comes in and it kind of balances it out. So fight flight was meant as a survival mechanism, right, to happen like at a short time and then kind of go back to normal for hopefully a long period of time. And we're kind of in that all the time now. And especially with COVID and, the tensions, political tensions, racial tensions, I could probably take up the whole hour just labeling tensions that we've all got going all the time. So we're living in this almost constant modified or fight flight place. And it's really hard on physical health. I mean, we've got all kinds of data on that. So back to high stakes performance. I knew all this about the trauma literature and I understood the brain and body. And what I learned was, I actually learned this and conceived of it watching litigating attorneys. So I found that in watching litigating attorneys, some people were really, really good attorneys and some were really, really not so good attorneys. And I set out to kind of figure out what was the difference. And what I found was that really good attorneys were what I call inter and intrapersonal geniuses. Mm-hmm. So they were had so mastered their own physiology that they were able to calm themselves, to keep their voices more deep. They were aware of everything. There was one attorney I watched one time. Every time he started to talk, he would jingle the change in his pocket. And it was so distracting, like everybody in the courtroom was uncomfortable for him. Right. He had no idea who was doing it. So that's where high stakes performance comes in. Let me see if I can pull the definition off the top of my head. High stakes performance is the ability to tap into any of our resources at will. So your breathing, your heart rate, anything that you want to. You can actually do things to move the blood in your brain around in different places. So high stakes performance is the ability to tap into any of your resources at will, and at very high level, you have the ability to rest the other parts of yourself. So it's about managing energy and not time. So with COVID, if first of all, I have to be aware that I'm sort of stressing out, right?
Right.
Secondly, can I implement the techniques and methods that I, Dr. Hood, have created to bring my blood pressure down? lower my voice, calm my physiology. And yeah, you can. And that's what high stakes performance is about. So that just sort of, your question sort of fit the other thing that I do, which is high stakes performance. Yeah. I hope that all made sense. It's a little convoluted, but
no, it makes total sense. And I wonder, did everybody that was, good at kind of mitigating what's going on physiologically and everything, were they all conscious of doing that? Or did some of them just naturally know to do that?
That's a great question. So not all of them were conscious. Some of them just were attentive, or they had a lot of experience. I'll give you another example. I wrote an article for the American Bar Association. But it was a blog post, actually. It wasn't, I shouldn't say article, about Chris Christie and Marco Rubio. Do you remember the famous, time when Chris Christie just basically took Marco Rubio down in a debate?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I did was I went through that videotape and I wrote this blog post about every single thing that was telling me, as someone who reads people really well and teaches people about micro expressions and micro body languages and that kind of stuff. So Chris Christie, I doubt, has trained in this. I didn't train him, and I'm the one who made it up. So, but there are other people who can teach you similar things through, with scientific literature to underpin it. But Chris Christie was a longtime prosecutor, and watching him when he took the cues, and my guess is it was largely unconscious, he just knew exactly what he was doing. So if you watch that, do you want to hear about it? Like, do you want me to go through it for you?
Sure, absolutely, yes.
Okay, yeah. So if you watch that video, as I recall, Marco Rubio, he was the youngest in the debate. He, in the beginning, was sort of shifting his weight from foot to foot. So that may have been a technique that he learned you can move a little bit behind a podium that will keep the circulation going through your body, which helps to dispel, again, all the chemicals in fight flight a little bit. My guess is he was just nervous, right? So what happened was he started to do his thing. And I think, if I recall correctly, he started repeating this kind of, learned talking point about Obama, something, 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 something. And it was clearly a talking point because he had it memorized word for word for word. And at some point, he made a mistake, or Chris Christie called him on something, and he started to fumble a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then he said something else, and Chris Christie made a joke, and the audience laughed. And as soon as the audience laughed, you can see Chris Christie completely change. He just, from my perspective, he just sort of went, from the blood in the frontal lobes to the blood and anywhere but the frontal lobe. So he just completely left his executive functioning centers.
You mean Rubio?
Where critical thinking. Rubio. Yeah,
okay,
Rubio.
Okay.
Sorry.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And so when that happened, somehow, and I'm sure it was unconsciously, Chris Christie picked up on it, and he turns and fully faces him and starts talking directly to him, which of course shuts Rubio down more. And then Rubio starts to repeat this talking point about Obama, and he starts putting it in places where it's completely out of context. So at that point, all he had left was his long-term memory, where he had memorized this stuff, and he couldn't actually access anything in real time that was relevant to the question or the statement that Christie was saying to him. So he basically lost all access to his frontal lobes, which is where our logic and our analytical thinking and language, by the way, are all housed in our brains. So it's just fascinating to me how those things can work, in the negative direction, but then we can also train people to turn that around and work in the other direction.
It makes me think think of something that I had someone, I don't even remember who, and I'm sorry if it was a listener of the show, but someone had taught me a few years ago. Oh no, I remember. It was a therapist, of course it was a therapist, said, okay, well, when you start to cry, because I used to do a lot of public speaking, and I do not love it. I am not someone that gets up there and just some of my colleagues, even on the network, are they just love it. And Do not love it at
You
all.
just don't.
You could put me on a stage having a conversation with another person, fabulous. But no, I don't. It's just not something I love. So anyway,
So it's the number one adult phobia. Just so you know, that is the number one adult phobia.
And it's
speaking. It's not, really scary.
It is. It's scary, and it's kind of interesting when I don't feel afraid of it at all. I feel very comfortable on a stage. I just find it very draining. I find it very draining. So
interesting.
So but I always have talked about, childhood sexual abuse and these very serious topics, as that's part of my experience. Yeah. And so I was at a place in my life where I couldn't control the cry. I couldn't control anymore. And it was because I needed to do some more trauma work, but I couldn't control it. And she gave me such a great technique. She said, when you feel that coming on, as you're telling the story, and you can feel when you are going to lose your shit.
Right.
I want you to say,
you can feel it coming.
You can, and I can tell, because I know me, I'm not going to, I'm going to start squeaking like a dolphin. This is not going to be good. She said, I want you to look around that room and say in your head, paperclip, rhino, banana, whatever it is that you see as you're talking. I want you to pull yourself out of that area of the brain that I guess you're talking about. And I use that technique, and now I can do a talk, and I don't care how difficult the topic is. I can still get to the level of tears or a change in my voice pitch, but I don't lose it because I don't need to do it anymore. But I did a long time of paperclip, banana, chair, basketball, whatever, to get me through it. So is that sort of
so? I think so. I'm not sure. So basically, you would look at a person and you would label them paperclip or
no.
basketball?
I literally would just think. I would just look at inanimate objects in the room, and
okay.
If there was a pencil on the table, I would think to myself, pencil, as I was saying this emotional thing, and it helped me suck the emotion enough out of what I was saying so that I didn't lose it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So what you were doing was you were accessing the part of your brain that uses and composes language, which is going to pull the blood back up toward out of the limbic system, which is where the emotions are tied to, right?
Right.
So she was giving you something. Yeah, that's brilliant. I'll tell you something I did. It was pretty fun. It was with a kid who was sent to me by his father to coach him for I call him my baseball kid, for baseball, and super talented, wonderful, hardworking. I'm just a gem of a young man. And he had been doing really well until I guess it was toward his junior year in high school when he was starting to look at colleges and stuff. And his RBI just started plunging, right? So he was having a hard time when he stepped into the box to get ready to bat. And I'm not a baseball person, so I'm hoping I'm using all the right terms, but
not either. I'm going with you and what you're saying. Right. Sounds good to me.
But somebody out there knows.
Yes, exactly.
She doesn't know about baseball. Yeah. And also, if I can, remind me to tell you about the Don't Kick Me Out of the Tribe drive. Okay. I'll jot it down too, because it's super important to this conversation. But anyway, so and his coaches, when he came to me, so his baseball coaches were telling him, you're just thinking too much. And I said, okay, so what did they tell you to do? And they said, they told me not to think so much. And I said, well, that's super helpful. And I said, well, then what did you do? And he said, well, I would start trying to sing a song in my head. And I thought, what a brilliant young man. That's actually really, almost there, right? So trauma, at least we know, happens sensorily and emotionally. And that tends to be more in the limbic system and more sort of on the right side of your brain where artistic things happen, right?
Right.
And so by singing a song, he was kind of reinforcing where that blood was already going. And so what I said was, why don't you just do some math problems in your head, which would bring him kind of like pencil, paperclip, right?
Yes.
Brought him where he had to actually calculate. The tough thing was the kid was brilliant. And so I would ask him to do stuff. He's like, it doesn't help me. But then we got to more difficult math, and lo and behold, I think it went up. I don't know. He was close to 300 in like a really short period of time, because it probably also did what your therapist was helping you do, which was get out of that emotional place and the nervous place and get more to the analytical place. Yeah. Yeah.
It makes me think of, since we're talking about baseball, Bull Durham, where the
Mm-hmm.
if you saw that movie where Tim, oh man, I'm so sorry, listeners, I can't think of the guy. He was married to Susan. Well, he was a partner of Susan Sarandon forever, and they met on that movie. But anyway, he was the pitcher, the famous young pitcher, and he would wear women's underwear under his baseball uniform when he got up on the mound to do these pitches, because he would wait, he was the best pitcher ever, and yet he would just go off his game and throw and like hurt people and throw a ball, at 90 miles an hour into the stands. But if he would wear
Mm.
a garter belt and like pop it against his thigh under his uniform, on the outside of his uniform, that would help him like not wig out.
So that's another thing. So that's another thing that's actually grounded in science. So we have a sympathetic nervous system and a parasympathetic nervous system. Okay. So the sympathetic nervous system is what is involved with fight flight. So think of the sympathetic nervous system as the gas pedal, right?
Right.
The parasympathetic nervous system is the opposite. It's more like the brakes, and it calms your physiology and your body, responses, right? So one of the things that happens when people have a big dump of chemicals from their sympathetic nervous system is they can get a little floaty. Like, have you ever just been so stressed out that you feel kind of numb, or you feel like you're almost weightless and float? Okay, so that's a lot of chemicals being dumped into your system, and it's totally normal for something that's going on in front of you that's really scary, or if you have trauma, right, and you that's been triggered, right? So one of the techniques that I use with people is called it's not tapping, because tapping is a different thing, but it's almost like slapping. So you take your open hand, like you were gonna slap your hands together and clap, right? Mm-hmm. And what you do is you start at your feet, and you hit your right foot and your left foot, then up your leg, and you actually want to smack it. If you can do it on bare skin, it's even better.
Like don't scratch the mosquito bite, smack it, that kind of thing. Okay.
Exactly. And you're going back and forth all the way up. You go across your belly and your chest and your neck and your shoulders, and you cross over into your arms and your head. And what you're doing is you're bringing, when you go below the limit of tolerance, you need to sort of wake yourself back up again, right? Mm. So that's when you do this smacking. And it brings the parasympathetic nervous system on board. And that ties into play. So, that's another thing that really is important. And in the research and things that I do, I really encourage people to play, because you can't just be on all the time. No. High stakes performers and people who are healing trauma too, the best thing you can do for yourself is block off time where you do nothing, not like a hobby, not like just like, can you, if you're in a place in your healing, can you just lie on a bed or sit on a couch, no TV, no book, just listen to the rain or the birds? And so important.
Oh, absolutely. And use there have been techniques that I have used where I didn't know what I was doing, and then later went, oh, I was doing something that some brilliant therapist told me to do. Oh, I was doing that. That's why I asked the question about, do people always know when they're a high stakes performer? Do they know what they're doing? And not all of them do. And that doesn't mean that they're better or they're more evolved or what have you. It's just, you find like I was saying, I don't really like public speaking. It doesn't make me nervous, but I don't really like it. And you have to get to a place where you are okay with not liking something. We don't have to constantly be climbing this ladder. People get so on this success ladder, and I'm going to go do this TED talk, and I'm going to write this book, and I'm going to, and that's all fantastic. There's nothing wrong with that. But at some point, I really feel like it's healthy to kind of separate yourself from that and take care of you and realize that is all stuff outside of you. That's what you do. It's not who you be.
That's right. That's lovely. Yeah, that's exactly right. I actually have people put a line down the middle of a piece of paper and have them write me on one side. And then I usually have them write, what I do, kind of what you're referring to, and then also my opinions. So that kind of gets into what we're experiencing right now. And I think it's so important because people are so divided and polarized and hurt and upset and angry, and rightly so. I understand.
Yes.
I mean, I don't understand what it's like to be an African-American male. I can't.
Right.
I can empathize to the best of my ability, and I can be an ally, and I can try the best I can. I can never understand because I'm not. But what I'm talking about is when people identify with their opinions, that means that if you disagree with me, you have a different opinion, you're attacking me. And it's just so hurtful when people can't do what you just said. Like, there's me, and then there are the things that I do, and there are the things that I own, and they're my roles, like wife, mother, business woman, whatever. Those are just roles, and then there are your opinions. And if you can't separate those things, then you're going to take everything really personally, especially when someone disagrees with you. And it's about you then, and not about your opinion, which is separate from you.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important right now. Yeah. Interestingly enough, when you're in sort of a fight flight, so say you're in the window of tolerance, but almost you're topping out a little bit, or over outside the window of tolerance in fight flight, what happens is your brain narrows, your vision even narrows, right? So if you're already not so good at not identifying with your opinions, you're just going to become worse at it if you're already sort of jacked up, right?
Yeah. I had a friend of mine who I do another show on the network about empaths being super, super empathetic person. And she was talking about someone that we both know, I know well, and she doesn't know very well at all, and saying this person, it just isn't tethered. I've never met anybody so untethered. That's why she latches on to other people with a T. Yes. Like just not tethered, not rooted to anything. Why she always latches on to really strong people, and then sort of morphs into the ideals and so on of this person, even if this person is not someone you really want to latch ideas onto, but because they're so untethered that that they'll just sort of like the wind. Okay, and I'm going to blow over here and get this opinion. I'm going to go over here and get this opinion. And where that comes from, a lot of it to me is fear.
Yeah. And also boundaries. I mean, and it's different if your boundaries are violated when you're a child.
Absolutely.
And you never really get to put them up there very solidly, right? Or ever at all. I mean, Yeah, I mean, I think it's really true, and I've known people like that too. Heck, I've probably been that person at times in my life, just because.
Me too.
Just feeling so. Well, I refer to it as a core, and a psychological core self is actually a thing, and I do think people need a psychological core self to be psychologically healthy ever. But I think it's probably a continuum that. Things hit you really hard in your life and you start, so I'm thinking this, trauma. So one of the definitions, or one of the ways that we understand trauma in the trauma literature, is that it's a shattering of one's world view or one's assumptive world.
Let's talk about when you're in physical pain. I bring this up. I want you to talk about you. I have something I've never had before, which is plantar fasciitis, right? This is a new thing for me, and it sucks. And it is so much pain. And I have really been struggling with focus and just because, if you can't walk without being in excruciating pain, you don't really feel motivated to do much. And it's not like I can clean my house without my feet being involved. So
so we're in a very similar place.
So let's talk about that.
And so here's my, I don't have science to support this, but I can just pull off the top of my head. My guess is it's out there, but I'm just going to say this is just my opinion. I think about it this way. So, we have, if your brain is a computer and you have so much RAM, right?
Right.
Pain takes up RAM, trauma takes up RAM, anxiety takes up. I mean, it all takes pieces of your brain's power away, right?
Yes.
And so that's how I see it. So I have had a back issue it's a spinal listhesis, which is where one or more of your vertebrae move into your spinal cord. They move from your back towards your belly on the inside, and it pinches the spinal cord. And I had a surgery 2 years ago where they tried to hollow that out a little bit, and they didn't do a fusion. And then at a year, I was having really bad sciatic pain down both sides. Couldn't sit, couldn't stand. I mean, just chronic pain like you, right?
Yeah.
And they did a laminectomy. It resolved everything perfectly on the left side. My side was still really painful. So at my year follow-up, I did TPT for over a year. Went back to my neurosurgeon, and he said, I think he said, if we go back in, he said, I'm going to fuse it, because he said, I just can't do this again to you, and then maybe have to do it again, or then have to do it again later.
Right.
So I said, can you give me another year or so? So I just wanted to do yoga, and I've always been really physically fit, and my core's always been strong. And so a year turned into 2, thanks to COVID, right?
Right.
And we're just putting pieces back together for me. I'm just falling apart. So I'd taken a fall about 4 years ago on a boat that had really steep steps down to the galley below. And I started down the steps, and I slipped in the top step. I was holding onto the hatch, but I lost my grip. And I fell from the first step to the 8th step, with no bouncing in between, just straight down, and hit on my left flank, like between my hip and my ribs. So there was no bones there to stop the break, and it just went right into my side. Oof. Big bruise, broke my toe. Buddy taped my toe, and I thought, oh, it's just a big bruise, whatever. And the bruise went away, and it wasn't real bad. And then about 3 years later, it starts burning, and I'm feeling this bulge, and I had created an 8-inch hernia in my lower left back. So I just got that repaired in July, and because I was sedentary and I couldn't use my abs, and then the sciatic pain came back really badly. So basically, I'm going in for spinal surgery, a fusion of my L4, L5 Monday. Oh, wow. And I have this really exciting talk to give to the Virginia Judges and Lawyers Association tomorrow. And so I could tell my brain is just not quite working so well. But so tell me, what do you think about pain? Like, what is, because I think everybody experiences it differently.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because I have lived with someone for 30, or I've had someone, my partner, my former husband, who we're divorced since forever, but we were living together again, and we've off and on done this for 33 years. And he has had chronic pain for the entire time I've known him. So I've watched it and I've gone through, the opioid addiction from the pain. I mean, I've run the gamut, of being an observer and it affecting me obviously personally and all of those things. But I've never been someone that's had anything chronic other than emotional pain. So this new thing, and my plantar fasciitis is nothing compared to what he's had to deal with, but it's been real interesting I'm not like you. I'm not someone that was into fitness and has this core strength and I've been very not good about those kind of things. And yet here I'm in this place of, I really set myself up to have to commit to being physically fit because it was important to me. So I found people that would get up at 5 a.m. with me and work out until I made my body crave it so much that I can't not do it anymore. So yay for me for figuring out how I need to be motivated to freaking stick to something. Yay. And then in the midst of it, I'm doing an hour a day of yoga. I'm doing an hour, 3.5 mile walks every day. I'm also doing other things. And then boom, it feels like I'm walking. COVID, which that's okay. Because you can still do yoga and you can still do walks outside with people. Yeah. But I get to the point where every step is like I'm walking on pins, daggers up into my heels. So what am I going to do? Like, I my body is like, you did all this. You are not stopping. I don't care if you got to get a wheelchair and like work out your arms.
Right.
I bought a trike. I bought one of those Moby trikes, that recumbent trikes that you can pedal away, and it doesn't bother my feet near as much as the walking. But aside from all of that, the level I never really appreciate. I look at my partner and I just go, I know you don't need to hear me say I'm sorry, but I didn't understand with the level, how much you were dealing with, why your temper became what it was at different parts in our relationship, why you couldn't focus on work or whatever. I couldn't understand until now. I really, truly understand. And for me, it's made me, I could cry. I'm doing paperclip banana chip right now because I have this well of empathy from the experience of it now that I never had before. And I always think in terms of trauma, when we use our voices, when we do these shows, you've got your show, Traumatic States of America. We've got these things that we do. It's not like you're going up and talking about making widgets. You're going up and you're talking about, serious stuff. But there's something to be said for the experience. You just can't really get there. I'm not someone who can get there fully and appreciate the beauty of it, the beauty of how much empathy there is now for people that are in physical pain, who tell themselves, I'm a loser, I can't get anything done, I'm too depressed to work, I would have gone, maybe they just can't get it together. And now I'm like, oh, no, you are fighting every day to just remotely function as best as you can. You are stronger than anyone I've ever known. That level of empathy around it, I would not have been able to get to had I not had this going on.
Yeah, I agree. And I think people need to be more understanding about psychological pain too, because there's not a physical thing to look at. There's nothing physical showing, right? And it does it too. It really does get in the way, and it takes up a lot of your brain's energy. I mean, it can be devastating. So I came across something. It's interesting that you told that story, because I came across something for myself that it's embarrassing to talk about, but I don't mind, because I feel like everything that we share, somebody else has experienced, and so it's just part of the human condition. But I've gained weight since I've had my really serious chronic back pain over the last 2 years. And it's like I'd have to starve myself, because I literally can't do much of anything. I mean, I go up the stairs super slowly. I try to avoid them. I try to avoid all kinds of stuff because everything hurts. And so it helped me realize that I have had this judgment about people who were overweight, in that they didn't work, if they just worked out enough, if they, well, guess what? I can't work out enough, and I'm gaining weight. And so there was this, or if I saw someone in pain, like they had bad knees or bad back, and they were overweight, I thought, well, they just weigh too much. They've broken down their knees. And it wasn't a conscious thing. Right. But my experience, just like yours with pain, my experience with pain was like, wow, like I can't believe you actually had this down there somewhere. And I'm glad it's out, because, it's just one more population in our country that is, hurt by others. I mean, I've done shows on adult literacy. The goal with my podcast is to try to get people to think critically and to put themselves in someone else's shoes. It's got a thread of trauma that goes through everything. But one of the things that I learned by listening to this guest about adult literacy, her name is Dr. Cynthia Clay, and she said that I think it was 30 million. It's on the show. I can't remember the number, but basically, way too many people in our country can't read their medicine bottles.
Right.
It was like, well, that's dangerous. That's horrible. And then she talked about all the shame. And so I think the more we talk, and I think women are really good at this, we're good at sharing and being vulnerable and empathetic and that kind of stuff, the better we'll all be. Yeah, it's really
so true. I
fascinating.
love that you shared that. I mean, that took some guts, and I was sending you a virtual hug as you were saying it. No one has ever
Thank you.
come at that weight from that way that you just did, and yet it is so true. And I feel like the healing that can come from COVID, the political landscape, races, all these things that are going on that are like an apocalypse and now the fires that are going on. I mean, just all of this stuff, the healing that can come from this by being forced as the race of human being, the fact that this is a race, we're all in it together, we're all human beings, take away gender, take away, all that. If we can get to this next level of empathy, that we actually might just freaking move it up a notch in terms of our evolution.
Oh, I have hope. I do have hope. I really think we can. I have hope because we have the technology. I think that it will take a lot of sort of warriors out front. And one of the things that has been crossing my mind since we've been having this conversation is something I learned. I volunteered at Johns Hopkins Hope Lodge for cancer patients. And it's provided by the American Cancer Society. And it's free of charge. Anyone who's getting treatment at either Johns Hopkins or University of Maryland can come with a caregiver, and they can stay for free and they get meals and people volunteer. It's a lovely, lovely place in Baltimore, obviously, Johns Hopkins area. And I volunteered to run the caregivers support group. And this was already after I had a lot of education. I had, I understood trauma, and I often used myself as my own guinea pig because it's just really handy. I mean, I'm always here, right? And I was
takes bravery.
I was diagnosed.
Yes.
Right. Well, a lot of times it's just me, myself, and I just jot down, I felt this and I did, but I do like sharing it because then maybe somebody else can start, well, I did that too. And I think that's we start to make a change is when we all start realizing we're not alone. Like really aren't alone.
We're much more alike than we are different.
That's right. That's really true. So, I would go, I'd leave about, I was working on a really big research project, and I would leave around 2:30 in the afternoon from the DC area to beat traffic, both DC and Baltimore, to get there. Otherwise, I'd just be sitting. And I'd rather get there early, mingle with patients, talk to people, be of help if I could, or I would just study. And so I would get back around 10. My group was from 7 to 9:30 usually, or 7 to 9, I think. And I'd get home around 10. I would be so exhausted every time I left that group. And I performed well. I mean, I did the right things. I held boundaries. I was more of a facilitator. It was really to make a safe space for people to talk about their experiences with their, loved ones, cancer and pain, right? Like you. No patients were allowed, it was just caregivers.
Right.
And I would call my mom on the way back almost every single time. My voice would be like this. And I hadn't hardly done any talking. And I would just be exhausted. And I kind of knew what it was. It's what we've already talked about, right?
Right.
And interestingly, there was one group, there were only 3 women. It was myself as the facilitator. And then there was a woman who had breast cancer, stage 4, was in the process of dying likely, who had a daughter, my daughter's age, and she was my age. Across from her sat a young woman, my daughter's age, the woman who was my age had a daughter, my daughter's age, who was dying of cancer, breast cancer. And then there was a young girl about my daughter's age whose mother was dying of breast cancer. And there to my right and my left, I can't even tell you what, just how the brain works, but I can't tell you what the third person talked about. I was just so aware. And I remember something, I don't know if you know who Pema Chodron is. Oh. She's a Buddhist nun.
Oh, I just got a chill up the back of my neck because I was just on her site today and I never visited. So it's funny that you just brought that
there
up.
you go.
But yeah,
Yeah.
woo,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I used to listen to her a lot. I still do, but for years and years and years, probably over a decade, I would listen to her retreats and her, all of her stuff. And at one point, she talked about something that made a lot of sense to me. And I'd been working on this for about 5 years before this event happened with the caregiver support group. She talked about the difference between empathy and sympathy. And she said, empathy is when you are feeling, with someone, right? Like you've rightly described. Sympathy is when you are feeling sorry for someone, and it's kind of a top-down thing. Like I'm above you and I feel sorry for you. I feel pity for you. But the interesting thing that she talked about was she called it falling into oneself. And she said that we can only be as helpful as far as we don't fall into ourselves. And what she meant by that was that I can be empathetic and I can understand as best I can and empathize with what you're going through. But the moment I get so emotional, like when your crying gets out of control, then she says you're falling into yourself, and then it becomes about you.
Right.
And then you're no longer helpful. And I was like, dang, that's like bong, like right in my face, right? And so I'd really been trying to sort of practice with, because of course I'm feeling with people because they're in a really difficult situation with a loved one who's fighting a deadly disease, right? And there was lots of tears and lots of anger. And I worked just to kind of try to see like how close can I get without sort of falling in, like losing it, right?
Right.
And
okay.
Right. So I've been working out for a few years. And then this one night with all that heavy stuff there, I walked out and I was like, I'm not tired. And I don't know what happened. I don't know if it was so like real in my real life, like just too close to home, or if I had some sort of, I don't know. But from then on in, I did not feel tired after that group. And it was sort of a turning point in my coaching and training as a coach is, really important too, because we train to be non-attached. Another Buddhist principle, right?
Right.
To not be attached to the outcome. And coaching, same thing. You train not to be attached to the outcome, because then you're sort of driving somebody else's car or driving their life, right? And that's not believing that they've got it within them. So all of this stuff is really nuanced, and I love that you're at this place where you're looking at all these more nuanced pieces, because I think there are lots of people out there who are going there or beyond. I mean, wherever people need this. And I think somewhere, whether it's conscious or not, people know they need this.
Yeah, they come to
especially
it like a
now.
beacon. I mean, I feel like the further we go in time, through this 2020, the more people are going to need this. The more, I just had a discussion with a company that we may or may not do a film with about mental health, and they were like, well, the timing isn't good because film studios are completely backed up, and nobody's getting anything out. And I said, we're never not going to be needed. First of all, this topic is not going to be, is never not going to be needed. No matter what's going on, everybody needs to handle their, talk about mental health. It's a good thing. Right. But the more that we get into this, as the months pass and so on, people are going to be looking for these kinds of conversations, right, to help them through all the truckload of stuff that's going to be hitting them. Like some of us that have been in this, that have done the trauma work, that have been in, or done, like it's ever done, but you know what I'm saying? Like have done a lot of that work. Like
been working on it.
Been working on it. I mean, I'm working on it since I was 12 years old. So I'm 50. So I got a long history of working on it. And so I can do what you're saying to where it doesn't drain me like it used to. Because I work on the detachment, to the compassionate detachment, all of those things, so that when people really are at the place because of the work they're having to do, because of what's happening right now, right? That when they're at that stage that we all get to, where they're ready to hear, how do I now continue to heal? that's even more so when people are going to be listening to our shows and go, okay, help, more than they ever have in the past. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, it totally makes sense. It totally makes sense. And, I was sort of admonished by my branding guy to just stay with trauma today. But you asked this question about high stakes performance, and to me, they're so, and you obviously got it too, they're so interconnected.
But you can't talk about one without the other. They belong together.
Yeah, it's the same brain, it's the same nervous system, it's the same, the same
Absolutely.
human being. And that's where we're all alike. And that's where my work is, it helps me because it doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter what gender you are. It doesn't matter what your sexual preference is. It doesn't matter how old you are, what you weigh. That brain is still going to be the same. It's going to have the same basic mechanisms unless you've got some sort of, injury to your brain. And then trauma, and I don't know if you know this, but we're calling it PTSI now. You probably are aware of that.
No, I'm not.
Yeah.
So what is TTSI?
Okay. So PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder, right? We all know that. For a long time, a lot of us were trying to get people to use PTS, post-traumatic stress.
Right.
But it's kind of undeniable that those of us who've had trauma have these residual symptoms, right? We can't just ignore them, right? So now what's happening is we're getting brain images, and there have been a lot of, not me particularly, but a lot of researchers who are looking at brain imaging of traumatized brains, and they're actually visualizing something that looks like a lesion. So, like a blood clot looks like, it's visible. It's a dark spot on a brain scan. A stroke, cancer. Those things show up as a thing on the brain scan.
Wow.
And now they're finding that so does trauma. And so the I is injury, post-traumatic stress injury, which I think we're going to stick with at least for quite a while because it just makes total sense.
I like
because the brain doesn't function. Yeah. So I'll tell you another thing that I started, I have a hashtag called Stop Fixing Trauma. And I started that because we don't treat, just like mental illness, right, or mental health, we don't treat it the same as we do physical health.
Yep.
We just don't. And it's been such a long, steep uphill battle, but we're better, but we're not there. So as I was writing, I don't know, something, I write every day, I started thinking about, when you have a broken bone, they don't fix it in terms of, they don't try to make it like it was before the break.
Right.
Because we know it's never going to be like it was before the break. It's now broken. It can heal stronger. It can heal deformed or misshapen. It can heal weaker, but it's going to be different, right?
Yep.
So why in the world do we approach trauma that way? Do you know we actually have memory erasing drugs? So so they actually can erase a conscious memory, which in my opinion is disastrous because what you're leaving is the unconscious memory and it's no longer accessible. So now you have the symptoms of a post-traumatic stress injury without conscious memory to help guide the healing.
That to me is like a precursor to schizophrenia. Honestly, that to me feels
Terrifying.
Like it would split, it would cause fissures in someone. And I'm of course into fissures now because that's what's happening with my feet. But to have this thing that happened and then the memory not be able to find your way back to it. It's like Hansel and Gretel without any breadcrumbs. Like what on earth are you thinking to erase? That does not. That is going to cause so many more issues doing that than just moving somebody.
Yeah. Through. And it's like a childhood trauma though, or infant trauma. So, people who are sort of, they say pre-memory, but we've got memory. It just isn't accessible to us. But if you're, traumatized as an infant or a 2-year-old, you probably don't have conscious access to that. And it may come back in what I call picture memories, like you'll see like a scene or something, or, it's sort of commensurate with a flashback. But but to try to do that, So I'm really about the natural way of healing trauma, and I call it processing trauma. So first of all, stop fixing trauma really means stop trying to make me who I was before the trauma, because it's just not going to work. And it makes me feel like shit.
Yes.
I've got enough to deal with, right? Like, I've got enough to deal with. I'm traumatized. Don't tell me I need to be fixed now, because it ain't going to happen. First of all, it's a waste of time. And you make me feel bad about myself. And I already feel bad about myself, right?
I was just thinking, it's when every time you've been saying this, I think of people that say, I heard it today. I was asked to speak at a women's networking thing over Zoom. And I was like, oh, I have to talk for 30 minutes where it's not back and forth with someone. I really am not looking forward to it, because I like the back and forth, But anyway, I did it. And I had a couple of people go, yeah, we just need to get back to where we were before. We've just got to. And I thought, as you're saying this, I'm thinking why that always bugs me. It bugs me because we're not gonna. This is called trauma, what's happening right now. COVID,
exactly.
Politics, all the racial tension, everything that's going on is trauma, trauma, trauma. We are not going back to where things were before. So you just better get on board with pushing forward to something new. I promise it will be better if you do the work, but we ain't going back.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that. First of all, you're right. We can't go back. But when I talk to women, I haven't heard one single woman say, I want to go back.
Oh, I have.
Women are feeling, in my opinion, women are feeling freedom in this, because they're right, because they are more free, right?
Right.
This is another little story. I was on LinkedIn, and it was about 3 weeks after we had a shutdown, right? And there was a pretty well-known gentleman who's got a huge audience, and a lot of people follow him just because he's got a wide audience, and he's good at what he does. And he said something about how, it's been 3 weeks and I'm working from home, and I'm interrupted, and I can't have my space, and there's, like, I just don't know how much longer I can do this. And I responded, and I said, respectfully, because I never want to be a jerk. I mean, but I do think sometimes we need people to say something. And I said, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but, with all due respect, women have been dealing with this forever.
Right.
Like, we have been dealing with this since we were hunter-gatherers. Like, that's what we do. And now we're working outside the home too. And he was very gracious, but the number of DMs I got from women and the hysterical things they said, it was one of those moments. It was like, right. Like, I'm not the only one feeling
you hit
like
on the point. Yes. And I want to make sure that you wrote something down that you wanted to share.
Yes. So you were talking about public speaking, and I work a lot with sort of the nuances of social anxiety. And so I do talk about social anxiety, or a lot of my talks have it in there. And what I call it the don't kick me out of the tribe drive. And what that is basically deep in our old brain is hardwired the need to fit in enough socially so that we literally didn't get kicked out of the tribe clan, because we would be killed. We'd be eaten by wild animals, right?
Right.
So that's a real thing that's still there in our old brain. And when we're up in front of an audience and we're standing at a podium, that's terrifying, because it clicks into a part of our brain that really says, if this doesn't go well, you could die. And people don't understand how, that's why it's so terrifying to people.
I was just thinking, not that this is about a therapy session for me, but you just helped me put something together that, okay, so it also is the part about where you got to a place where you didn't feel overwhelmed anymore. You got past that. So this overwhelming thing that I feel from doing speaking, not that I need to go develop a career in doing it, because I'm not, but
you don't like it.
But because I just kind of don't like it. But the thing though is I don't want to, and if I'm ever in a situation where it's possibly an issue, I'm like enough in therapy to go, okay, yeah, it's okay. You don't have to like that, but this is kind of an issue too. So at least work on the issue, right? So I think, so
Right.
what does this have to do with maybe some worthiness stuff? Because it's okay for me to have 3,000 so interviews with other people where we're really focused. My job is to talk to them and have a conversation with them, but really the show is about them and what they do and what their expertise is. It's not about my own. So
Mhm.
what is it about me getting up and commanding a stage that makes me think that I am not valuable enough to be there, that what I have to say is not,
Well,
you know,
eh, yeah. You know what so this is the way I sort of approach things. Um, that's hardwired in our brain. And so there's
right.
always going to come that impulse, right? And yeah, you can desensitize yourself by doing 25 talks a week, and eventually it'll just seem like no big deal.
Right.
That's one way. The way I look at it is um, I try to acquire skills. So, I had to learn to drive. I had to figure out my roadcaster and figure out how to do a podcast. It didn't just come out of nowhere. But instead of looking at it like, what is wrong with me? Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with people who get PTSD. I think I always say it's a healthy brain dealing with a really unhealthy situation. So I would say to you, is it possible that this has nothing to do with your self-worth or your value or anything that you need to fix again, anything wrong, right? Or work through or heal from. It may just be that you have that healthy brain going, oh, I remember when our ancestors
Oh.
would get killed if they were too different from somebody else or they didn't perform well. And so you just acquire the skills to deal with it.
Well, hey, I like that much better.
Right? Right. I know, me too. That sounds so much nicer.
I just like any chance that we get, when you're steeped in this field, especially where you're studying human behavior, you can overanalyze and be overly responsible for everything, and then add a traumatic childhood with childhood emotional neglect and whatever the definitions of this, that, or the other. Then you become this hyper vigilant person that is like, it's got to be something that I need to fix within myself, and and so yes, it's nice to hear someone say, well, why don't we just not do all that, and maybe it's just this.
Yeah,
Not
I mean,
everything
it
needs to
helps
be
me.
examined forever.
Right, right. Or fixed. I mean, I really like to
Yes.
stop fixing trauma because I think that's taken us
Oh,
down a really bad road. And also I wanted to say about COVID too. So my company Future Safe, that's what it and I had Future Safe like 5 or 6 years ago before COVID was ever even a real word in the everyday
wow.
jargon. And the tagline is from mass trauma to collective healing.
Mm,
And that's what this is. I mean, you're absolutely right. This is mass trauma. And there was the Spanish flu, but we didn't have the internet during the Spanish flu because we
right.
are all, I mean, it's kind of a researcher's dream in a really, researchy way, right? The entire globe is experiencing the same stressor. And
Yeah.
any of those differences are going to be because someone was, either prior trauma or a different culture or, all of those things. I mean, it's a really interesting thought for we researchers to think that, especially in psychology, in trauma, right, that everyone's experiencing on some level the same exact stressor, and we're connected, and so we're sharing data, and it's a really different time, and but I do have hope. I really do have
I
hope.
do too. I'm right there. I'm right there with you. And you are invited on as many shows as you would have time to do, because this was fun. I don't get without this sounding egotistical. You can imagine with the number of people that I've interviewed over the course of these 8 years, I've heard a
Yeah.
lot, and from people at the top of their game and advocates and so on. I don't often get surprised anymore with some things, because I've done a million shows about bipolar, or I've done, so I love it when someone comes on and I'm like, no, I haven't heard of that. Oh, that is a unique way of looking at it. It's what makes it fun for me to do this. So I say thank you
Yeah.
so much for that.
Oh, It's been my pleasure. This has been a blast. I've loved this. It's so fun. It's like super fun being a guest. It's like, yeah, this is nice.
I know it's different when you're the host. You really notice the difference of, oh, okay, now I'm a guest. So, well, I want to make sure, listeners, that you know that Dr. Lorie Hood, the podcast is called Traumatic States of America. It's wonderful. I've listened to a couple shows. It's really good. You know what the heck you're doing. And please tell my listeners where else they can find information about you and your company.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So my personal website is loriehoodphd.com. That's where my speaker role is and all the things that I do. And I also have a company. My first company is called the Hood Group, and that is where high stakes performance lives. And I have a company called Future Safe, which is for first responders. I started that about 8 years ago. And then, did I say Future Safe? No, I'm sorry. Future Safe is mass trauma to collective healing. And that one I started about 5 or 6 years ago. Responders First, and it's respondersfirstllc.com is the company I started for first responders. And I use high stakes performance with them as well.
At which they need it, because boy, talk about high stakes performers.
Oh, man.
First responders.
Yeah. It's really interesting because there are high stakes performers and high stakes jobs.
Right.
And so if you have a non-high stakes performer and a high stakes job, you have a lot of trauma and stress. Yeah.
Yep. So, burnout.
Yeah.
I mean, you can have burnout as a high stakes performer in a high stakes job. There can be burnout there too, but even, closer to that or less ability to deal is, the other option, not a high stakes performer in a high stakes job. So, yeah. Oh, well, I'm so glad that you came on, and like I said, anytime, you are welcome.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. It really lifted my day. I thought it was going to be, kind of stressful to fit it in, but it was really uplifting, and I got to laugh. So thank you for the laugh.
Absolutely. And listeners, you're going to get a lot of laughter hearing me fumble all the time. And it's lovely when a guest fumbles too. Yay, it's not just me.
I did my part. I believe in sort of a partnership kind of approach.
Exactly. Well, listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Mental Health News Radio. Listeners, stay tuned. Here are some of the outtakes from this show. Enjoy.
When you start to kind of crash that below the window of tolerance, you are then bringing the sympathetic nervous system back on board. I think I switched that around. Let me try it again. So when you go below the window of tolerance, you need to sort of wake yourself back up again, right? Mm-hmm. So that's when you do this smacking, and it brings the parasympathetic nervous system on board. So
and that makes total sense.
Yes,
that's okay. That's why we have editors. It makes sense.
He better be really good, or she better be really good. God, Lord help me. Dang. Yeah, I know. It's like, how much more confusing can I be? And this is what I do all day.
No, you know what? It's okay. That's the thing too. Listeners love about my show is the constant fumbles that are almost always done by me. So it's okay.
Right.
It's like,
I'm helping you today a lot. We do outtakes on my show once in a while, because I'll be, there'll just be like real fumbles. And then oftentimes like a guest and myself will just start giggling, and we just get that like a can't stop laughing thing. So if your therapist has something for me, please send her to me, because she can make you not cry. Maybe she can make me not just keep giggling and laughing and taking up time. But
so fun though, isn't it? Oh my God, we need
and laughter is so important. Yes. Yeah. So that would be something I would think, I'm sure your show is very helpful to people right now, because, we need to laugh. It gets filed in a different part of my brain. It's a traumatic memory then, right? But, so I totally forgot where I was going with that. Where did I start?
As bad as I am.
I'm just totally screwing this whole thing up. Just say hi to your editor person. So wait, we should probably give him there you go. We should just try this again. I am sorry. I am really distracted, and I am really apologetic. I'm in really severe pain. So I have
Let's talk about that.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
I am too.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this is meant to be.
Oh,
And
interesting.
if you're
Okay.
okay with going a little bit over,
Absolutely.
let's
Yeah.
do
Because he's got
this.
so much to
Yeah.
chop out, right? Yeah.
We're going to have such great outtakes. I can hear Joe,
I know. I
which we
love
call
it.
him
I love it.
Joda. We call him Joda because he's so
Oh,
wise, but he's going to have a lot of fun. The out. He'll usually send them
bet.
to me and go, priceless. Hi, listeners. I'll make it quick. These are some really cool places that give discounts and other cool things for listeners of Mental Health News Radio Network. If you want to get amazing help with healing from narcissistic abuse, go to healfromanarcissist.com. If you want CBD products that are the best of the best, I use them myself, go to proze.com and use the code mentalhealth20, mentalhealth20. If you want to get daily perk ups that help retrain your brain to think more positively, go to perkupdaily.com. And also, just because this one's fun, snarkycandles.com. I guarantee you'll love them. Snarky with a Y, SNARKY, candles.com. And don't forget, if you want to hear all the shows on the network about first responders, you can go to firstrespondermentalhealthnetwork.com, and all of our shows that focus on narcissistic abuse, narcissisticabusehealingnetwork.com. Thanks for listening, and back to the show.
But will you ride the low, low, lows with me? Will you ride the low, low, lows with me?
One thing you can always count on at Mental Health News Radio Network and my show is that there will always be dogs around. Why? They are natural healers, excellent for your mental health. The original therapy dog Miles has something to say in just a moment. For now, please check out all of our amazing shows at mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com and all your favorite podcast apps. Until next time, I'm Kristin and Dr, and thank you for listening.
And I can ride the low, low, lows with me. I can ride the low, low, lows with me. Till my vision clears up perfectly. I can ride the low, low, lows with me.
Good boy.